Well, hey, y'all. Welcome to this season of the Oak Grove podcast, all about pathways to spiritual health. I'm Joseph, one of your pastors here. Glad to have Hanna Cain, our youth ministry assistant, with us, a third-year seminarian, and we'll get to some more details about that in a second. This is the first of 6 podcasts, which are going to all be about ways to improve and evaluate our spiritual health. We're going to be looking at 4 areas of what it means to be a faithful Christian, and those are worship, devotion, justice, and compassion. And we're also going to be looking at the episode today about what is a rule of life. And so that's a way of living in the world. It sounds fancy, regula, that's the Latin word for it. We'll get into some of the details and history of that. This is meant to be a companion to the Pathways to Spiritual Health booklet or small groups that you're in. You can download a copy of this in the link below this video, or if you're listening to it, you can go to the church's YouTube channel and find it there. Also find a video version as well. Yep. But the Pathways to Spiritual Health and Ways to Grow Our Faith is a 6-week program we're going to be doing here at the church as a way to improve our spiritual health. And so we're glad that you're here today, glad that you're learning and growing and trying to follow after that example of Jesus Christ, as we do here at Oak Grove, as we seek to include, to connect, to grow, and to live out our faith in the world. And so, before we get into the rule of life, and Hanna, who actually uses the rule of life in her actual life,
I do.
Tell us some about you and your life, Hanna.
Okay. Hi, my name is Hanna Cain. I am the youth ministry assistant here, and I've been working here for about a year and a half now. Yeah. It's flown by. I'm also a third-year seminarian at Candler School of Theology, getting my Master's of Divinity, pursuing ordination in the United Methodist Church to become an elder eventually, God willing.
Yeah.
That's okay. The big 3 things about me right now.
Yeah. But grew up in the area.
Grew up in the area. I grew up in Chambly, went to St. James UMC, which is kind of down the road. Then I went to undergrad at first Georgia Southern University, ended at University of Georgia, graduated with a religion degree in 2023, and moved straight on back to Atlanta.
Welcome back. We're so glad you're here, and you and CJ do a phenomenal job with our youth. Shout out to the to our youth ministry leaders who are helping lead that, the youth council, and also you all will be doing a version of this Spiritual Pathways in Sunday school.
Yes.
So that's something, if you're listening to this, you're a youth, check that out in case you missed a week. You could listen to this podcast instead. Yeah. But a rule of life, what in the world is it and where did it come from? And then we'll get into some of how you use a rule of life in your life.
Okay, so I got into a rule of life. I took a class my first year of seminary called Discipleship with Dr. Brett Opalinsky, who is amazing. One of my favorite classes I've taken at Candler. But in that class, we had 3 kind of units, and the middle one was, what is discipleship for me, and like a personal framework. So in those few weeks, we kind of developed what discipleship is in my personal life. And so at the end of that, we submitted a personal rule of life. And so it's been about a year and a half since then, and I have continued to play with it as time has gone on. But essentially, a rule of life is a very intentional and prayerfully crafted framework of how to live into your values and how to grow in your relationship with God. I think that's a pretty broad, basic
that's very helpful.
Definition.
Sure.
It's very much a guide. It's not a rule book per se that you're creating for yourself. Yeah, it looks different for every person, and you kind of build it with some frameworks in mind, and you kind of go from there.
Yeah, and it's meant to be something, again, the history of it is it comes out of the monastic tradition, so St. Benedict and St. Basil. So you have Eastern and Western churches. That's a long story in church history about that, but that includes our Orthodox friends, our Catholic, and now Protestant friends around the world. And so these 4th and 6th century rules were a way by which people patterned their lives. Just like we as Christians seek to pattern our lives after the example of Jesus Christ, these folks, monks and lay people, were trying to figure out a way to live a more faithful life. And so that's sort of how it began. Now, one of the questions I always think about like, well, I'm not a monk, I'm not a nun. Like, so how does this thing apply to me?
Right. So. St. Benedict, there's a bunch of monasteries around, and there's one in Conyers, Georgia, which is the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. And I've been there a few times, and I went specifically with that class, discipleship class, and got to speak to the abbot there, who Father Augustine is there. And so we talked a little bit about what the rule for them and the way that they live their life down in the monastery looks like, and how that can kind of relate to me, which I'm very much not a monk.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a really interesting conversation and time of learning. Being at the monastery with my classmates and with Father Augustine was super helpful because he did kind of help us to learn how to translate something that's been so important in their tradition into our kind of lives. Although we aren't monks, we have very similar commitments to God. We're all devoted to work and devoted to prayer and all of these things. And so for us, an average people who are living in Atlanta, continuing to make a rule that is realistic is one of the most important things that I think we can do. We shouldn't act like we're going to do more than we really are. And so being intentional in what we find important in growing our relationship with God and how we're going to do that is, I think, the first step.
Sure. And I think you're right, like about it being, the word rule is confusing in some ways for us. So if it's better to think about it as a way of life, the way of life.
Yeah.
Very Mandalorian, this is the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is sort of your way of being in the world. If that's more helpful to think about it that way, because it's less about having a bunch of rules, but it's about intentionality and setting aside that time and energy to think about what are the things I value, and then how do I work towards those goals, being more clear and consistent in those ways.
Yeah. Very much a guide, like a ruler. You're kind of straight line-ish.
Yeah. Well, a way of measuring yourself against certain standards or values you have. And I think that's important, but it's hard, in our world, it's very hard to be concise and clear, says the person talking long on a short, maybe podcast. But being clear about what matters to us, clarity is really helpful because there's so much happening in the world. There's so much going on. There's so many distracting things to our faith life, to our human lives, to our phones, the internet, all that. And so part of the function of a rule of life is to help us get clear about what matters to us. And then how do we use our time? And then how do we become consistent at doing that?
And it continues to help you grow in your faith life. Something we talk about with the youth is this idea of having like a faith toolbox. So things that when you don't know what to say, don't know what to pray, don't know what to do, when you go off to college or whatever your life circumstance is, what do you know? Our kids know the Lord's Prayer. They know the priestly benediction. There's these certain things that we've put in their faith toolbox. Yeah. And I think developing a rule of life is one of those things that can go in a faith toolbox of, well, I feel off track of my spiritual journey. What are some things that I already know that are important to me to kind of jump back onto that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I often think about, one of the points of this is sort of support and structure. Just like if you're growing something, for all you gardeners out there, growing a little plant, anything that climbs or is a vine, you've got to have some sort of trellis or track for it to stay on. In the same way as our lives keep moving forwards, that's part of our lives, keep moving. Change is still going to keep happening. But what are some things we can give our faith life and our lives in general to help us sort of stay on that track? And I think a toolbox is a great way to think about that because it gives people a sense of, I can do this, I have volition, I'm not alone in this, but also I don't have to figure it all out right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, I think, by writing out this list, essentially, it keeps you focused on what's most important to you. We can't do all the things. Nobody can do all the things. And so choosing the things that you want to prioritize at this point in your life, and those can change, but staying focused on what you feel is most important in growing your relationship with God at this time is a great gift that I think a rule of life offers.
Yeah. And part of the function of a rule of life and doing that in these small groups or at the end of your own creating your rule of life is sharing it in some sort of meaningful way, either with close, trusted people in your life, family members, pastor, spiritual advisor, whatever it might be. Or if you're in a group and you're doing this together, then you can share that with people in your group. At the end of this process, you and I will be discussing how to make your own rule of life. Some of them are beautiful and pretty. Some of them like, oh my goodness, you went into Canva and you just did everything. Or it's like if you're an artist, you can draw your own. Or maybe it's just a way to make it fit with what is you. But the part that's neat about that is having this accountability to it, or doing this with other people in Christian community, allows us to live a more faithful life. My favorite creed is "We are not alone. We live in God's world," and it ends with "We are not alone. Thanks be to God." So, in doing this together with other people, we can encourage other people. Say, "How's that rule of life coming?" And you're like, "Well, number 3, whoa," or it's like, actually, like, yeah, I mean, thanks for asking, Hannah. We talked about this 6 months ago. Yeah, it helps people have a sense of being seen and known and loved and cared for.
Yeah, and it's cool over time in community. You kind of see the transformation that people go through. And when you do that alongside one another, it's a really beautiful thing to see how God is working in the practices that you've committed yourself to. And I think a major part of discipleship, or the goal of discipleship, is for your heart to be more transformed, to be like Christ. And so when we do practices that are Christ-like, those things tend to happen.
Yeah. One of my favorite things I learned in seminary is this idea of your practice, your action, and then reflection upon that action. And so that our values and the things we say we believe and the things we actually believe inform what we do in the world. And when we do those things and we think about how did that go, it informs what we believe.
Absolutely.
And so this practice and action and reflection cycle going through time helps us to, in the Methodist tradition, keep moving onwards towards sanctification, which is that being made more mature in Christ, eventually like Christ, fully, and being fully transformed. A lot of this conversation that we're having about the pathways to spiritual health comes out of the General United Methodist Church. A bunch of folks were getting together and creating a toolbox, essentially a way by which people can engage in evaluating their spiritual health. The way we came by those 4 principles is actually from a thing called the Book of Discipline. Now, these rule of life, Book of Discipline, it sounds like, whoa. But in the United Methodist tradition, we have a book of church rules and laws and sort of guidelines about what we believe and who we say we are, and it's called the Book of Discipline. It allows us to not be disciplined, but to engage in discipleship. It means those who are taught by Jesus. And so that's where it all comes from. And so I'll read a paragraph from the Book of Discipline. To witness Jesus Christ in the world and to follow his teachings through acts of compassion, justice, worship, and devotion under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Now, it points out that we have these ways by which we're supposed to grow. And so that's where the 4 parts of this came together. So, Hannah, you've used a rule of life in your own life. So tell us a little bit about your rule of life, what you want to share about that, and how that helps you in your sort of everyday process for being a person who lives in the world.
Yes. So I created my first rule of life, like I said, about 1.5 years ago in my class. And I've kind of kept the same structure that I did there. We used I think he's a theologian, Stephen Macchia, talks about rule of life. And so his kind of structure is how I've formatted my rule of life. I have these kind of commitments of different compartments, I guess, of life that I kind of hold to. So I have like a spiritual category, I have a relationships category, I have like a financial category, missional, and physical/rest. So those are kind of the ways that I've structured my rule of life. But yeah, I essentially have it printed out. I have mine right here, actually.
Oh, man.
Right here.
It's 2 pages.
It
Okay.
is 2 pages.
It's 2 pages, single spaced.
I know.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, it was a seminary assignment at first.
Seminary. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
I go back to it often and try to stay accountable. We talked about try to keep up accountability. I have a spiritual director that I meet with once a week. So we talk about those things. He's kind of my accountability partner there. As we just said, it's a longer document than maybe I would encourage you to make. But I do kind of have some highlighted points of each, which I think are kind of my primary focuses when I am pursuing it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in the process, we'll have going through the next 4 weeks, which will cover these areas of worship and devotion, compassion, and justice. We're going to be asking the question in each of those weeks is, what out of this area of worship do I want to add to my rule of life? Some people do the categories you've mentioned. Some people might want to do the categories of worship, devotion, compassion, justice. Yeah. But I love the categories of sort of what our life is. The point of this is that our lives that are spiritual and our lives that are not, everything is spiritual. It's all part of it. It all goes together. That everything is sacred. Every part of our life is meaningful and good.
Yeah.
Part of the whole scandal of Jesus coming and being human is that God was fully human, fully divine. We light 2 candles on the altar most every Sunday to help us recognize the full divinity, full humanity of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so God understands every part of our lives, the high, the low, even understanding death, Jesus, loss of a child, Jesus. I mean, all these complicated and beautiful things of life that God understands them. And so in a rule of life, it's helping us to think through how we want to live. As you mentioned, it's not like a hard, fast rule like no chocolate on Thursdays or whatever the thing is. It's not about any sort of penalties or anything like that. There's no repercussions for not living out your rule of life, except that you're not living into all that you think you are called to live into by God. So there's no like punishment, flogging, none of that. It's much more a way by which you want to be intentional about your life. And so we're going to be covering that over these next couple of weeks and thinking about how do I add these things into my rule of life. And then in that last week, we're going to have Hanna back on the podcast here to help us think through and talk through how to make our own rule of life. Well, Hanna, thanks for being on the podcast for this first episode. Again, we have 5 more coming after this on Tuesdays at 5 in the morning, in case you're up, on YouTube and Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Ways by which we can engage with this content and material. If you're in a small group and you find these helpful, tell other people about them. If you're not in a small group and just found this on the internet, you can download a copy of the Participants Guide for Pathways to Spiritual Health, which came out of some partners in the United Methodist Church and the North Georgia Conference. But a really shout out to everybody who's engaging with this material. Also to our staff and team who helped create this, especially to Reverend Melissa Cain Hall, who helped edit and cohere all of this together, and many other friends and staff members. So look forward to seeing you all in the next episode of the podcast. Thank you again to Hanna.
Thank you.
And to our youth and the whole crew. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Peace.